it is reduced down into an oil, which then concentrates everything, and it's put into the vape pen. When you heat it, especially in the vape pen and concentrated, you get hydrogen cyanide. You are inhaling cyanide gas. Let that sink in for a moment. Mm-hmm.
It's truly astonishing when you consider that actually happens to be one of the toxic ingredients that has been found in the people that have been poisoned and gone to the hospital recently with this big controversy over the vaping pens. And you were able to make the connection between that and what you found?
Yes. And you start asking why at the various different levels. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? What is causing this? And you start going back further and further and further and further, which brought us back to the substrate, the coconut core, the substrate that's being utilized in these, where they're using river water and various contaminated water to wash, quote unquote, their products. And I don't know if anybody has any background or experience or has seen anything with what the water systems are like in these countries. It's pretty scary.
Well, I mean, some
water sources, food in that.
Yeah, and some water sources are where they bathe. The sewage is commingled. There are a lot of problems with the water purity in some of the third world countries where some of these products are being grown, and they don't have the same kind of regulatory oversight of their water supply that we have here in the States. But even here in the States, we have contamination that goes unnoticed or unreported, I should say. And, it causes a lot of problems for us, especially in these agricultural areas where the water tables are contaminated with all of the things that they spray all over these plants. But that's a whole other topic. But, I just find it astonishing that you were able to make the connection between the cocoa core and the vaping issue. And have you had any discussions with the CDC about what you have found, or are you planning to in the future?
No, I'm actually not planning to. And the reason being is cannabis is governed by the states. So if you have a regulatory body that's overseeing from a federal level, it would be better if the growers would manage themselves and if the growers would be aware of this problem. We do not feel that the growers are currently aware of this issue, which is why we created a massive report at plantstds.com. Catchy name. It's substrate transmitted diseases. So plantstds.com. And there's also a landing page for COA to CYA. And that is our public service announcement to both consumers and growers. This issue is manageable on two levels. One, if the growers are aware that the majority of the coconut substrate that's out there is potentially contaminated with pathogenic mold, to always seek a certificate of analysis on all of the plant inputs that they use to grow before they start growing. That's the first step. Second step is for consumers to be aware of what a certificate of analysis is and how to read it. If a consumer sees a COA and the cannabis product has been tested for heavy metals and it passes the heavy metals test, but it was not analyzed for pathogens or mold, that would be a red flag not to purchase it. Another red flag would be if there is no link back to a COA whatsoever. If the package or the product that the consumer wishes to purchase has no traceable analysis, then our recommendation would be to find a product that does have traceable analysis. Otherwise, the consumer is gambling with their life at this point, especially when it comes to vaping. But the mold recalls and the yeast recalls have been happening in dispensaries with pre-rolls. And you think about why a pre-roll? Well, it's because you can't see it. So then it opens the question about if you can't see it, as Jessica mentioned, it reduces down into an oil. The oil can go into a vape pen. What else can the oil go into? And that's just about any finished product.
That is incredible advice for consumers. I agree. And I think that so many people just trust the sources. I mean, we're used to going to the grocery store and not really paying much attention to certificates of analysis. And I imagine that this problem is happening in vegetables as well.
Right. So in the news reports that came out about the toxicology, I believe it was the pathology report, it came back indicating that there was fungicide found in the pathology. And if there's fungicide as a chemical on somebody's lung tissue, then why was it even there? And if you backtrack one step further, that would be the presence of mold. So if mold is an issue, then the grower attempted to eliminate the mold with a chemical product on a natural plant medicine.
That is just so scary. And Jessica, tell me the health ramifications of this.
Oh, well, I mean, you're inhaling cyanide. You're poisoning yourself. I mean, you can get, burns on your lungs, blisters. You can have all sorts of respiratory issues and diseases that can be created from it. The big one though is that you can die. It's a big deal, just from stuff like this. Now, it may not be just a one-time type of thing. However, regular users, they're definitely going to find issues with this as well. And I mean, when you start looking at some of the materials that are sold, perhaps, black market or, outside of dispensaries where they're not so controlled, there's even growers who are using Roundup to dry their plants faster.
That is absolutely horrifying to me. And this is true also in the tobacco industry, isn't it? Where they're creating nicotine vape products?
Well, the nicotine and vape products, they're not quite the same manufacturing as that goes into the other because they're not necessarily using the oils.
I see. But how did you learn about the Roundup being used as a drying agent?
That would be from one of our associates who has been in the agriculture industry for well over 25 years, and he's been he manufactures organic nutrients. He consults for various growers, whether they're in the cannabis industry, the hemp industry, or, if they're just growing, grapes for their vineyard. So he's seen it all. And with all of this that was coming down, he brought that to a discussion one day, and it was shocking to us. Shocking.
Well, it is shocking, and I guess I'm not really sure how Roundup could be a drying. I would think that Roundup would just, kill everything on the plant itself, drying or not.
Glyphosate is a desiccant, can be used as a desiccant, a drying agent.
Right. Yeah, and I know it kills weeds, and without killing the plants that are chemically altered to grow despite having an herbicide sprayed on them or sprayed in the soil. So
the plants are already harvested, so they're harvested and hung to dry.
Right.
And if they're not drying fast enough, that's when they're using the glyphosate products to try and dry them faster.
Wow. And is glyphosate something that's in a typical COA for cannabis when they're sending their product to the lab? If they're testing for heavy metals and they're testing for pathogens, will glyphosate automatically come up, or is this something that the growers are going to need to actually ask the laboratory to test specifically for glyphosate?
The grower will know what they've done to it, but there is a catalog that the laboratories have, and they can absolutely pinpoint what was done to the plant.
And the thing is, you have to realize that when a grower sends something in, they'll send it in and request for potentially heavy metal testing, but they may not be requesting on the COA to have the pathogens or the other contaminants. Now, there's states that are requiring a higher level of testing and regulation where the growers are having to provide all this additional information, which is good.
Well, what about for the end product? The end product manufacturers do their own lab testing and usually provide a COA to the end user, or they make it available to the end user online or wherever. And would the glyphosate show up in the standard testing that people do to test the products after it's left the grower?
If they're looking for it.
Yes, it will come up in the analysis.
Oh, go ahead.
If they're testing for it.
So specifically, what we need to do then is just make sure that the manufacturers also realize that glyphosate is just one other contaminant that they need to test for in addition to the standard heavy metals and pathogen tests that they run. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Wow.
One of the positive notes that came out of all of this is that there are coconut substrate manufacturers that are doing it right, as well as vape companies that are doing it right. These companies, certain companies, are truly certified. They walk the walk. They test their own materials multiple times before it even becomes a retail product. And so, like I said, we analyzed 5 of the most popular brands, and there is one front runner. And that information can be found on plantstds.com. If anybody's interested in the actual lab analysis, they can get it from us, or they can get it from you, Snowden. We'll provide it to you.
Yeah, I definitely plan to post all of this online, but I think it's a matter of everyone in the supply chain to be aware that there are additional contaminants that they need to test for in order to avoid the obvious problems that we've had with the vaping products.
Exactly. And so if consumers start demanding analysis, then that will guide the industry. So I really feel that this is an issue that can be resolved from within. However, this also branches out to world agriculture. And today there was a report that came out on a massive listeria outbreak, and that's a pathogen, and it's in vegetables in Canada and the United States. It's a massive health warning and recall.
Before you go any further on this one, I just wanted to let people know that listeria is a pathogen that's prevalent in places where they have a lot of agricultural farm animal waste, specifically on pig farms and factory chicken farms as well. Am I right about that, or is that? That is a source.
That is a source of it, yes. It could go back to what fertilizer was used. It could go back to what inputs were used. So it's kind of going along the same lines of what we're talking about with the substrate. It's testing for purity in advance before anything starts to grow. So recalls like this massive produce recall would have less of a tendency to happen.
Well, preventative medicine in a way for agriculture.
Yep. Kind of like, goes along with the name of the plant STDs, We're having fun with it. However, you can prevent it.
Right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. But this is very disturbing, too. I mean, I'm glad that there's light at the end of the tunnel and it's not the oncoming train, and that there are conscientious providers who test their product before they give it to growers. But it does all boil down to awareness, just being aware that these are problems and making sure that they test it before they lose millions of dollars after harvesting something that's going to be contaminated.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the inputs that we're talking about, that would be the substrate, which is what we had analyzed for contaminants. And there's contaminants in there. There's water,